Police in Germany have carried out nationwide raids against suspected ringleaders of two far-right extremist groups accused of membership of criminal organisations involving violence. The two groups targeted are Deutsche Jugend voran and Jung und Stark, or German Youth Forward and Young and Strong. No arrests were made, with the searches aimed at gathering evidence. Joining me now to discuss these raids and the groups targeted is Hans-Jakob Schindler of the Counter Extremism Project. Mr. Schindler, 600 officers, 50 locations, 12 states. That sounds like a huge operation. What did you make of that news?
Well, it is a huge operation, and it's part of the response of the security services to a new aspect in right-wing extremism, mobilization and violence in Germany. We've seen over the last 20 years, really, that the right-wing extremist scene in part got older. It also got more professional, and it clearly set on an aim to undermine or be part of the political system and change it from within through elections and parties and proxy parties. But this one is really a return to a quite open, quite violent, quite in-your-face youth culture, including a lot of offline violence. And so this raids today, I think, is the beginning of a security authorities' response to that phenomenon that we've seen for at least 2 years now.
I mean, maybe just tell me a bit about the ideology that these groups spread.
So a classic right-wing extremist ideology, very much focused on targeting what they perceive political opponents, so anyone who is not of their ideological milieu. Of course, sexual orientation is an aim, but also foreigners, but also, of course, anyone who dares to criticize them. So the difference here is that it's, on the one hand, this youth movement, a little bit more diverse, and you have people coming back with their jackboots and, you know, the white laces and the bomber jackets. They look like they come straight out of the skinheads. They look like straight out of the 1990s, something that the actual broader strategic outreach of the scene wanted to overcome. So when you look at the classical right-wing extremist networks, you can see that they try to make their heinous ideology a little more user-friendly, in that they no longer really want to look like skinheads and violent individuals. That goes down to even the way that they present their online shops. So you can still buy T-shirts with hateful slogans, but they are no longer presented by muscly skinhead guys, but they are presented in black and white, but they're presented in colorful pictures. There are ladies modeling the T-shirts. There are kids modeling the T-shirts. So there was really the strategy to say, we are on a political path here to change the political system, and therefore we should avoid being too much open in your face. Now, that movement that was a target of the raid today is contrary to all of these strategic decisions that the milieu as a large has done the last 10 years, and goes back to actually getting younger people, and we're talking 14, 15, 19, maximum 20-year-olds, involved in the movement, apparently let them run rampage in the first couple of years and then integrate them into the wider milieu. So apparently the strategy possibly later on. So it is criticized even within the milieu because it's so openly violent, so openly threatening, something that the milieu had tried to overcome.
How are they able to recruit young people? Give us an idea of the message and how they're doing that.
Look, I mean, as always, in just about every criminal, terrorist, extremist phenomenon these days, social media really is the key role here. So the time where these groups just meet offline are long over. So that's why you had so many federal states involved in the raids, because they were just looking at 36 of the key organizers. So the mobilization, the recruitment, the communication is primarily online on various social media platforms. But what makes the difference between a pure online phenomenon like the base, which is on the EU terror list as a right-wing extremist milieu, here you had classic emphasis on attacks against Christopher Street Day, attacks against political opponents, banner dropping, so offline operations. So you organize, mobilize, recruit, and radicalize individuals online. But the point here is not just to gather ideologically followers, but actually pushing them towards offline actions, including offline violence. And the 36 individuals today are allegedly the key organizers of those two groups. Now, it's also an interesting fact that the charge is not terrorism. The charge is having a criminal network, which is legally slightly easier to prove. You need 2 or more individuals. That's a given here, given the size of the raids and the individuals that they're looking at and their online followers that organize in a hierarchical manner. That's also usually the case in the right-wing extremist milieu to systematically subvert criminal law provisions. So if you are mobilizing for offline actions, and these offline actions involve criminal actions, such as offline violence, you actually have all of the elements for a criminal organization here. It is not a banning order by the against those groups by the Federal Ministry of Interior, which would dissolve the groups and then make the groups at that moment illegal, but it's now a criminal law response first.
Is it a new phenomenon? You talked at the beginning of this interview about the right-wing extremist scene in Germany being traditionally older, trying to be more professional. Is this a new phenomenon that we are observing here of young people being radicalized?
Yeah, of course. And it's because there is both a strength and a weakness within the milieu. Obviously, the milieu is still responsible for the vast amount of violence. If you look at extremist violence in Germany, right-wing extremism still tops it. However, the milieu is getting older. And this is an attempt of the milieu to rejuvenate itself, to attract a whole wide range of younger individuals back into the milieu that may not actually be part of it otherwise. And that's why you have this step back from the strategy that you operate a little bit more behind the scenes, that your emphasis on ideological operations such as marches and demonstrations, and you allow, in inverted comma, that there is now again very 1990s-like street violence perpetrated by these young people.
Are these groups linked to the political scene in Germany? You know, we have the well-known AfD party, which is under the surveillance of the security services. We have the lesser known, more extremist, the Heimat Party, that's kind of the Homeland Party. How do the groups today link, or do they at all link with those political movements?
Well, the links for the Heimat and its youth organization is very clear. I mean, some of the groups actually advertised events, meetings of the Heimat, formerly known as NPD. Where the dividing line is between the AfD and this milieu is a very fluid state. The AfD, of course, says we have nothing to do with these violent individuals, but then every once in a while you realize people who have contacts to that milieu are actually working for the AfD. In some cases in the past, even groups that had terrorism charges levied against them had former or current members or functionaries of the AfD in the close circle of the key accused individuals. So there is no clear dividing line, and the AfD has never managed, maybe never really wanted to manage, a clear dividing line and wall between it as a political party who is in the federal parliament and out of parliament movements, violence-prone individuals and groups. There's always this slight overlap in a quite interesting and very noticeable regularity.
Yeah, the AfD often, they have this non-cooperation list, don't they? And they say that means that you cannot be a member of some of these groups and also be a member of the AfD. But increasingly, when it comes to meeting and talking and kind of networking, they say that there's no ban on contact with individuals in those groups, which I think is, as you say, it's talking about that kind of that grey area. I'm just wondering whether you think that the authorities really have an answer to the growing far-right extremism here in Germany.
Look, I mean, one set of searches is not going to do this. This is a multifaceted strategy that even the former federal government started, where you need to think about this milieu as a network. Yes, there are identifiable groups that are part of that milieu, but it's also a hallmark of right-wing extremist milieus in Europe, including in Germany, that you have various labels of groups and networks, but they all feel they're having a common goal here, the change of the political system away from a free, liberal, democratic society. So you have to understand this as a network, and you have to understand there are various parts of the network. There is a more professionalized, much in the background, operating financial structure that involves music labels, event organizations, combat fighters, real estate deals. Then there is the more politically oriented, slightly older part of the milieu. And then there is this new phenomenon, very much organized online, very much younger, that is very much violence prone. And unless you understand this as all part of the same milieu, and you try to do this bottom-up approach where you look at the individual extremist action or crime, you will not get a sustainable disruption of that milieu. And that's why there is the strategy from the former federal government to tackle right-wing extremism, which is network-based and is continued by the current government. And these raids today really are an expression of that, which you gather evidence and then you look at the best and most sustainable disruption option, whether that's financial charges, whether that's criminal charges, whether that's an association ban. You need to look at the whole toolkit of what the government is. In addition, and this is not just for the right-wing extremism milieu, this for any phenomenon that is dangerous, whether it's large-scale organized crime, whether it's counter-espionage, whether it's sabotage operations by the Russian state, or this new alleged Iranian terror group, which in fact seems to be an Iranian intelligence operation, or right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism, or Islamist extremism, online is the key. Here are people who get radicalized. Here they get recruited. Here the milieu in part is also financing itself. And we have given ourselves a regulation in the European Union that still does not demand most things proactively from the platforms. We're still in this old system that from the outside, without actually having full access to the platforms, security forces need to notify the platforms. The same would be to say the security forces have to notify banks if there's money laundering going on, just to explain how strange this thought is, right? Banks need to proactively look for money laundering and send a warning. Online platforms do not need to do that. So unless we are trying to get this balance better and get the industry to help us, we will always discuss that once again, this attack or this group organized online, and we really hadn't seen it until it becomes quite violent.
That's a very interesting point to end on there about online regulations, because obviously that's one of these things that increasingly we hear criticism of overbearing regulations, especially when it comes to the digital sphere, that it's a crackdown on free speech. And we see that especially from populist parties here in Europe. So very interesting point there. Hans-Jakob Schindler, thank you ever so much for your time and insights today.
Thank you so much.